Charles is off gallivanting again. This is MacNN Podcast, episode 63, now new and improved with Jordan and Mike. Hello, Jordan.
Hooray, 2 weeks in a row. Thanks for coming back, man.
2 weeks in a row. It's a thing, huh?
Yeah, it's always nice to come back.
Charles is off doing the Fringe Festival in Orlando, Florida this week. We hope his crew breaks a leg. We hope he does not personally break a leg. Let's jump right into it. Manhattan DA Cyrus Vance. Maybe you've heard of this guy, maybe you haven't with our encryption discussions. He has called this week for a mandatory retention of encryption keys by Silicon Valley so they can pop open phones at any time they get a subpoena for it. We've obviously been over this and around this and through this and under this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We have actually not heard Jordan's point of view on this. Jordan?
Why not? Let's just all keep safes, and every safe, let's just keep all the combinations in a single place. And then whenever somebody wants some money, we just give them a combination, say, here you go. Doesn't matter who it's for, because it's the same damn thing.
Well, I guess I didn't have to worry about you being on the same page as the rest of us. I understand what he's trying to do, and I understand his point of view. He is operating strictly from a law enforcement standpoint. He's operating strictly from a, hey, we're law enforcement. If we have a subpoena, we can come for you at any time. There is another precedent from several years ago that talks about how modern cell phones are more than just a purse. They're more than just a duffel bag of paper. They contain information that previously was contained in your head, and you cannot be compelled to speak. However, earlier this week also, they were talking about how they were trying to force a compulsion to unlock a phone with a thumbprint. And the argument is, well, if we take your fingerprints when we arrest you, then we can force you to put your fingerprint on the phone. It's an interesting discussion, and obviously it's going to continue for several years to come. There's not going to be a quick solution on this. Vance, along with Director Comey, which we'll get into some craziness from him here in a few minutes, they keep on invoking the terrorism tree, where they say that if you don't talk to us about this now, then something's going to happen and you're not going to like what comes out about it. And Vance said earlier this week that we now live in a world where we are not getting all the facts. Many of the facts are on smartphones because criminals, just like you and me, have moved off paper and onto digital devices. I think it can be argued that law enforcement has never had all the facts. I don't think that it's a very clear statement by Vance, him saying that now they don't have all the facts as opposed to every other investigation they've ever done.
Well, it's kind of the same bag, isn't it? You want the police to know everything, and law enforcement, when you go to trial, you expect people to have all that information. But will you ever really, unless you were there? You can always get most of the story.
Yeah, even with eyewitnesses, you can have 5 eyewitnesses to something and they'll tell you similar stories, but they'll have different points of view and they'll have different angles of observation.
It goes back to the idea of thought police anyway, but I guess that's something else.
Well, yeah, it's going to what Director Comey said earlier this week. He actually said that a lawsuit collision was imminent with WhatsApp. WhatsApp is the Facebook-owned messaging service that has recently gone point-to-point encryption. And this is the kind of language that I don't appreciate in this kind of thing. WhatsApp has over 1 billion customers, and they're overwhelmingly good people. But in that 1 billion customers are terrorists and criminals. It's a huge feature of terrorist tradecraft. It's just the hyperbole that we're getting from law enforcement, and on the other hand, the stoking of public sentiment that we're getting from Apple. I'm not sure how helpful that is in this whole conversation.
It isn't. It's the whole one bad apple in the bunch that apparently that's all we need anymore. I've never understood that one's bad, they're all bad, that government seems to go to.
The founding fathers were real clear in that they would rather let guilty go free than one innocent man go to jail. And I guess this seems related to me. This seems that since they're looking for a universal lockpick, that all of us are going to have to suffer in the hands of, well, frankly, other criminals trying to get our personal information off of our phones and off of our computers. And we're real clear what MacNN's standpoint is on this. I understand that law enforcement wants this key. And I understand that there are people who say, well, if they've got a warrant, then they should be able to get to whatever they want. But I think it comes back to the free speech issue. I think it comes back to being able to be secure in your own thoughts and not be compelled to speak against your best interest. I don't see where they get to change this in legislation.
Well, I was going to say, by the conversation route that you're going, couldn't you almost then invoke an amendment?
In some states you can. In New York you can't, apparently. And in Pennsylvania you can't, apparently, because there's a story a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
We talked about in this podcast about a police deputy who was accused of having child porn, and he attempted to unlock his hard drives with these very long passcodes, and he couldn't do it. And they said, well, you didn't try hard enough, so we're going to send you to jail until at which point you do unlock these hard drives. Thing is, if you let the Apple keychain give you a password, then the odds are really, really good that you're not going to remember what it is. Here, I'm going to have the keychain just generate me a password randomly.
Well, it's not like it's just the keychain, and that goes further. I mean, if you use outside, 1Password, XPass, any of those things, it does the same thing.
Any of those will give you ridiculous passwords. But just as an example, let me go somewhere quickly and, oh yeah, this is just ridiculous. It starts XK4-1C9 and continues. And there's no way that I would remember that. The guy did unlock his Mac Pro and the guy did unlock his phone. But when it came down to these hard drives, he couldn't remember the password. And I'm concerned that we're going to end up with more cases like that. Well, you didn't unlock it for us. I don't remember the freaking password. Well, to jail with you. So this continues to be an issue. This is going to continue to be an issue. I guarantee you we're going to have the most characters written about this by the end of the year. Regarding WhatsApp, he's calling the iPhone, he calls it data at rest, and WhatsApp, he's calling it data in motion. And for that matter, you can call an iMessage data in motion. This mirrors language that they use in HIPAA about data in rest and data in motion, where data at rest is stored on the server somewhere, data in motion is being transmitted from point to point. And that's what he's referring to, is the FBI wants access to this data in motion, and they want it all the time. They want to be able to get to this at a moment's notice.
Isn't that kind of hypocritical?
A little bit.
Because aren't there generally law enforcement requirements that you can't transmit sensitive data electronically?
Well, you can transmit sensitive data electronically, but it has to be protected under a certain minimal level of encryption. Like, for instance, in HIPAA, moving health data from point to point has got to be 256-bit encryption at the very least. But the standard for it was set, I want to say 12 years ago. So I think the standard is actually unnecessarily weak at this point. But just the same, and he did say in front of Congress, Comey did say in front of Congress that encryption is a valuable tool and is a valuable privacy protection. And I just don't understand how he can either willingly be so obtuse that he can say that, well, the manufacturers can keep a safe key someplace for us to use when we need it. And I don't know why he doesn't think that this isn't just going to lead people to use an encryption product that was made in Tunisia as opposed to the United States.
It's that whole, it's fine until we need it. Wait, what? That's quite a jump in logic for most people.
Yeah, we can use it, but you can't. This isn't an anti-tank rifle we're talking about here.
Ooh, that'd be a good argument. But I want it, so I can't go to a gun show and buy an anti-tank rifle. Why should you be able to go to a manufacturer and go, I want his password?
Well,
we'll just draw a couple lines in the sand on that one.
Yeah, let's, I'm not really... Maybe I shouldn't have specifically mentioned that exact example, but the point is, this is not exactly like I'm buying a nuclear submarine on the surplus market. You know what I mean? I mean, this is not a military technology that has somehow fallen into the hands of the public.
Right. And that makes it worse because so many people have access to these kind of things. And it goes back to the whole idea that you create these 1Password entryways or these back doors. Sure, law enforcement will get to use it. And in some cases, probably for good purpose, or I guess to be optimistic, most. But just as many people, the bad apples in the bunch, will use that in a nefarious manner to either steal people's identities or other bad thing that can affect more than just one person in reality. I mean, you play a little bit of devil's advocate either way. You just have to look at which way is the least harmful.
Drawing a similar parallel, back in 2002, 2001, Microsoft said that our original Xbox console is secure.
Nah.
You cannot break into it. It will not be broken into. And then this guy called Bunny, he took it apart and he figured out the security on the Xbox. And there's a book about it, about how he did it and why he did it. And a similar thing happened with the Xbox 360. So these secrets don't stay secret for long.
No, it'll eventually all come out.
It will eventually all come out. And then what?
And then they will sit there, and when a company goes bankrupt because the government forced them to do that, they will sit there and do nothing.
So, and that's the biggest problem I have with this, is no secret stays a secret forever.
No, it's, all of this is such short-term thinking. I think that's my largest problem. It's never looking towards the future.
This is not on Jordan's study sheet, but also earlier this week, the Indian government said at a security conference that they have means and ways to break into modern phones, including the iPhone. And they didn't discuss how, and they didn't discuss why. But also in the congressional hearings from 2 months ago, the encryption expert on the board said that the FBI is woefully behind on third-party decryption methods for phones. I think that's probably, I think the Indians are full of it. I don't think that what they're saying is completely accurate. And I also don't think that the FBI has been paying much attention to this. I think that they've been assuming that the cell phone companies would just pop these things open for them at a moment's notice until both Google and Apple both said, well, no, now we're going to do this, so we can't.
I think that's a little bit of just American thinking. That's the way we apply good old American muscle to the rest of the world. We say to do it, so do it. And it doesn't make any allowances for these companies that are now global. And we're seeing just the world struggle with that in general. I mean, between having data centers in other countries when Apple's here, and you see all these weird things that are coming up. But on the other side of that, the FBI has it in their power to actually get these people on board to help create these tools, to help crack these devices. So why aren't they going in that direction too? I mean, has government agencies like that lost their recruitment power?
Well, they are to some extent. Comey said during the security briefing with the reporters, he said that the tool that they have access to that cracked in the San Bernardino iPhone 5C, they're trying to figure out how to repurpose it, which is kind of funny considering they say that they don't have to give it up in conjunction with the presidential executive order to Apple because they don't own it, which is splitting legal hairs.
And say there's some other problems with that, isn't there?
Yeah. He also said that he has a good sense of who the contractor is, but since the information is so compartmentalized inside the FBI that he couldn't give you people's names about it, which is an enormous steaming load of crap.
And on the other side of that, shouldn't the company creating this have to legally inform the company that it's cracking their devices?
Well, the presidential,
at least for a commercial purpose.
You would think so. You would think so. But the presidential order doesn't really mandate that private companies give this information. But like if a federal agency finds a flaw in a device, they are required to give that information to the company that makes the device. And the FBI is skirting that by saying that they don't own it, so they can't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I willingly bought this pirated DVD, but I bought it. It's mine.
There are so many statements around this 5C hack that are contradictory that he has made himself.
Yeah, that's very true.
That I'm not, and this is probably intentional. I don't know what to believe from him or not.
How much of it is trying to actually do the right thing and saying something else and then having to backpedal on it a little bit?
I think he's dancing on a knife's edge. I think he has to make the government happy. I think he has to make the United States public not quite so pissed off at him.
Not an enviable position to be in.
Yeah, when they got into the 5C, the public opinion on this matter was shifting. The original numbers that we had gotten from CNN on siding with the FBI and siding with Apple were 42% on Apple's side and 58% on the FBI side, plus or minus 2% for margin of error. We did our own sampling, which was nothing like that. Our own sampling was significantly more on the side of Apple. And this wasn't even outside an Apple store or anything like that. This was just us mugging people as they walked around a couple of malls in Virginia. And the other mainstream news networks, as the story progressed, it was getting 50-50, 51-49, 53-47. And you could see the trend. You could draw the line from week to week, how this was developing. So, and yeah, a lot of this is just ugly and is continuing to be ugly. There are cases all over the United States where the All Writs Act is still being used to try and force Apple to crack open these phones. Apple is saying, no, we can't, to heck with you. And we're just going to have to see how it goes. And a lot of this is going to play out behind closed doors. And that is the wrong place for the rest of us to have to try and figure out how it's playing out.
Especially when we're in such a technology-minded culture now. It's so ingrained in everyday life that it should be crucial for people to know these kind of activities and what they can and can't do. I guess it goes back to the old adage of the internet. If you can't say it, no, someone face to face, just don't say it at all.
Major strange hacks every single day. Microsoft's feedback portal supplier was hacked. A couple years ago, they had 20 million people, and they had said that 0.1% of their customers' data was compromised to these hackers. 20 million people times 0.1%, that's still 20,000 people. Did I do the math right? Well, it's still a lot of people. Let's leave it at that.
I'm counting on my fingers. You can't see it.
No, okay, that's fine. And these hacks are happening all the time. And it's not any individual one hack that's posing a problem. What it is these groups are taking the efforts of multiple hacks and putting them together and saying, well, this guy uses this same password across all these different places.
Yeah, it goes a lot deeper than that because it's not even necessarily hacking for a lot of these things. It's just scraping open databases.
Yep.
and then you can draw, parallels from there. It's getting to the point where it's no longer one attack vector. And how do you combat that? It's like, how does an average citizen even start to combat that?
Well, you combat that by having good encryption on your phones.
First step.
Without a backdoor.
And back up everything.
So enough with Cyrus Vance, enough with James Comey. Let's play the music and let's move on. News overnight, we record this on Friday the 13th, and news came out overnight that Apple has invested $1 billion, billion with a B, in Chinese ride-hailing, I can't even say it, Didi Chuxing, I guess. Considerable investment is an understatement, $1 billion in this company. And Tim Cook says that it's going to help the computer maker increase its understanding of how the Chinese market works. Well, if you're going to put $1 billion, into a Chinese company, yeah, I think you're going to get a pretty good feel of how that market's going to work.
I'm confused by that one.
Confused by which one?
By how investing that much into a service gives you an idea of the Chinese market.
Well, I don't know, but the fact is...
It just feels like you can do it for less.
Probably. The company itself is valued at $20 billion. It takes up 87% of the private car hailing market in China. Think it's the Chinese Uber, okay?
All right.
Uber is in China, and the company is trying to fight Uber off because Uber is undercutting them a bit, the same as Uber has started to be undercut by services in the United States. Cook says, specifically, we are making the investment for a number of strategic reasons, including a chance to learn about certain segments of the Chinese market. Of course, we believe it will deliver a strong return for our invested capital over time as well. He also claims the deal reflects our excitement about their growing business and that of the long-term economic prospects of the country. It's interesting that they're doing this now, considering that the bookstore, the app store, and the movie store are still shut down in China. So I'm not sure exactly where they're going with this. But on the other hand, Apple can't win no matter what they do. They get yelled at for having all this money just sitting around, and then they invest $1 billion in this, and they get yelled at for doing this.
Well, that's kind of, I guess from a normal Joe standpoint, I don't understand why, again, it takes that much money to do that, unless it grants them so much creative power within that company.
I'm also wondering if it's not exactly a kickback to Chinese officials, but a message to Chinese officials saying, hey, look, we're serious about putting money into your country, not just taking it out.
Yeah, that's true. Or the government doesn't want to give them the leeway to make self-driving cars, so they're doing it there.
Yeah, there's a lot of speculation on the web today about, I know why Apple's doing this. Well, the truth is nobody really knows why Apple does this, or why Apple does anything for that matter. The Apple self-driving car, I'm still skeptical about. I don't think it's a whole car. I think they're just interested in the dash. I'm starting to look more seriously at it being the whole car. I don't know, and we don't know. And frankly, speculating about it is just intellectual exercise at this point. But related to this, isn't it about time that Uber drivers figure out they're just placeholders for automated cars anyway?
You have to wonder if the writing's on the wall anyway. Just that's the way we've been going.
Can you elaborate in your statement a little bit?
You've seen the rise of taxi cabs, especially in large metro areas, as we've kind of progressed.
Mm-hmm.
And you see a decline because you notice people start moving closer to things. They're not traveling as far, things like that. But then there's always that itch. It's like, hey, I need to go so far. I have to go to the airport or something. So I still have to do a cab. But then you have, unions and all these other overheads that are then passed on to the customer. And it's just another evolution of what we can do to get everything for a little bit less. So you go the freelance Joe Bob is driving to work, he can give you a ride too, and you pay him $6 instead of a cabbie $12. So if we can find enough of a cost saving measure to get these self-driving cars, especially if you start entering them in things like ride shares, or what would be really cool, I don't know if it ever happened, is you have cars that just drive around all the time and pick up people.
Well, I'm trying to remember what movie Johnny Cab was in. I want to say that was in Total Recall.
There was another movie I watched not that long ago. Hot Tub Time Machine 2. That's right. That's right.
Both movies, literary epics of our time.
with Lugal. Yeah.
Oh, it's terrible.
But it's that kind of idea. I think if we can make it cheaper than anything involving a person, that's the way we're going to go.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's just the prospect of money or if we're just tired of interacting with each other. I don't know. It could be a bit of both.
Maybe a little bit of both.
But going back to the dash point, that would actually make a lot more sense. Wouldn't it be in Apple's best interest to create a centralized app to get these people going, especially if we're still batting the idea of if actually employees or not?
I'm not convinced. I'm looking more at the fact that it might be a whole car just based on some of their hires, but we talked about this a little bit last week. But I think that they are heavily investing in the electronics of a car. But again, and I've said this before, I don't think they have that much interest in the engine and the transmission and all that other crap.
I'd say for automobiles, isn't China just a weird market?
Yeah, it's a funny, you would have thought that they would have just dumped $1 billion into Uber.
Yeah, but why would they do that? That doesn't seem very Apple.
Well, this whole move in China here doesn't seem very Apple either.
That's very true.
At least not to me. I mean, Look, here's the deal. Tim Cook is not Steve Jobs. And look, I'm sorry Steve died, but no company is ever exactly the same when a new CEO takes it. But Apple doesn't necessarily need Steve Jobs to prosper. It's a new market. This is an interesting move. But the thing is Cook is not deciding these things in a vacuum. He did not wake up one day and say, hey, well, I'm just going to write $1 billion check to this Chinese ride sharing company. He talked to everybody in his staff for advisory purposes to discuss it. He spoke with lawyers. He spoke with finance people. I'm sure he spoke with the Chinese government about it. And I'm sure this isn't a one-day decision.
No, this has probably been in the work for months. And shareholders, maybe not average people shareholders, but at least some larger folks have probably been made aware it's going on.
So it is what it is. And as with just about everything else Apple does, we never quite know why or how exactly it worked out for the company's bottom line.
We'll learn the week before it's important to us.
Thereabouts. And I am utterly done talking about this. So we're going to play the music and we're going to move on to something else. End of last week, beginning of this week, designer came out and said that, oh my God, Apple Music ate all of my music. And we did a lot of testing on this last summer. Oh my God, I spent seriously hundreds of man hours working on this about network shares and Apple Music and iTunes 12 eating things. And while no one still really knows what exactly happened, Apple is saying that it is remotely possible that a bug in iTunes, not in Apple Music, is your problem. And we're going to see what we can't do about implementing more security so things don't get deleted. Now, it's interesting to note that Apple is not able to reproduce the destruction of the music itself, the deletion of the customer's music itself. And what Apple is saying now, and what they said just a couple of hours ago when we recorded this, it says in an extremely small number of cases, users have reported that music files saved on their computer were removed without their permission. We're taking these reports seriously as we know how important music is to our customers, and our teams are focused on identifying the cause. We have not been able to reproduce this issue. However, we're releasing an update to iTunes early next week, which includes additional safeguards. And if a user experiences this issue, they should contact AppleCare, which is their standard. This is the end of the paragraph we're going to tack this on. Now, iMore did work on it, and we did work on it. And even though we were having iTunes libraries just mangled, we were having tracks changed, we just had all kinds of tag data manipulated and album art changed and substitutions. We were getting substitutions for things. We didn't have music ever just straight up deleted. And in fact, if things got totally mangled, what you could do is you could replace your iTunes library file, your .itl, with an older version you had restored, and lo and behold, everything is still there and everything is intact. With version 12.3 of iTunes, just about everything was gone. Just about all the problems were gone. I haven't had any problems at all, and let me do a quick check. I've got a 212 gigabyte iTunes music library right now. The problem I'm having is the original designer who reported this isn't giving a lot of follow-up data on this. People have said, well, hey, can you look in your iTunes music folder and see if your files are still there as opposed to just missing in iTunes? And he hasn't responded.
That seems like an easy thing to fix.
It does. Have you had any problems with iTunes at all? I don't think you subscribe to Apple Music, but have you had any problems with iTunes?
Every now and then, but I've never been able to really say what it was because of. I know that some things like I bought music out of Japan, and sometimes it'll spontaneously decide to change everything to English. So it'll look like I never actually purchased that album.
Okay.
But I have. It's like I'll have to go back and dig through my receipt, my actual profile to find them. And it doesn't always want to sync right because of that.
You switched your region to a different store region to get this? Is that what you did?
No. Like when they actually bring them over into American iTunes.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
That's the only real thing I've noticed. And that was all stuff bought in iTunes. It's nothing like this, I don't think.
I'm going to go on record now, and I've gone on record before, saying iTunes is not a perfect application. I think that it has swollen well past what it should be expected to control and maintain. And I think that we did a King for a Day feature not all that long ago where we said what we would change about Apple. And I think this perfectly falls under what I called quality assurance. I think that in trying to shift over from computing to mobile, I think that things like iTunes, they'll go heck with it, ship it, we need it. All the bugs may not have been shaken out enough. And the more I think about the problems that I was having with Apple Music over the summer and the work we did on testing it, the more I'm beginning to wonder if the problem isn't with Apple Music, and the problem was actually with iTunes from the get-go. And we never really could hammer it out. We had some help from Apple for a little while, and then James Dalrymple talked about it, and then they stopped talking to us and started talking to him about it, which is fine. James is a good guy. It's troublesome that even if this is a user problem, even if this is something that the original poster did wrong, that I still think this can be put on Apple's door. I think that the dialog boxes for Apple Music and iTunes are unnecessarily confusing. I think that Apple could be more clear about what each menu button does and why and how. Even just another box saying, okay, well, this is what you picked and this is exactly what's going to happen. As opposed to, okay, well, I'm just going to start replacing your local copies with iTunes Music copies.
And that's not always the best thing, because I know someone that actually found an error in one of the encoded ones that was off from the master.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. All because he had a vinyl copy.
Jeez.
Yeah.
I'm not even going to get into vinyl at this point. That's not even, that's not even something I want to talk about right now.
That's a whole nother tangent, but you run into those cases. Well, it's like, why you're replacing my file anyway?
Yeah.
Amazon does the same thing. If you upload a copy of something you bought, they'd replace it with their like 256-bit version. And
yeah. It's an ugly, ugly issue. And I'm glad that Apple's looking into it. I'm not convinced that in this case, I'm not convinced that it's a bug that Apple specifically has to fix, but more precautions to prevent something freaky from happening and iTunes from deleting your music, I think is a good thing.
Anything they can do to make it clear.
Anything you can do to make it safer for your music, really. I mean, that's really the issue here.
Yeah, that's true.
The tag changing that we were identifying back in the summer, it could have led to some pretty nasty scenarios where you have a live version and then the tags get changed to a non-live version. So Apple Music then downloads the non-live version onto your master library. It's just the cascade effect you'd get from a changed tag was just nasty. But it was nothing like the developer reported this week.
It makes you think that how many people didn't even notice that kind of thing was happening anyway because their libraries are so massive.
And poorly tagged.
Mr. 200 gigabytes over there.
Oh, my stuff is masterfully tagged. Thank you very much. Well, William wrote an editorial today, and it kind of slips under the radar. But the key here with anything else is if you're not backing up all of your things, you're making a giant mistake. If you have a digital asset that you need, it doesn't really exist until you have it in two separate locations. So if you have critical data, and even if you just have data you want to keep, just back it up. And a time machine backup is not necessarily enough.
Nope. 3 places.
We have lots of tutorials on how to do these backups. So please avail yourself of them. If you're not doing a backup, do it. Do it. Just stop the podcast, go get a hard drive, do some backups. We'll wait for you.
We'll see you in 3 days.
We'll see you in a couple days, and there'll be something else to say, I'm sure, about that. So everyone remembers the Los Angeles Unified School District problem. Everyone remembers the threatened court cases, and everyone remembers the canceled contracts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, until they just decided to heck with it. We're just not going to do anything, which is where they're at right now. Not all that far away in Coachella and the Coachella Unified School System District, they are crediting one iPad for every student, raising graduation rates in high school from 65% to 82% over the life of the program. Now, personally, I think 82% is still pretty low, but that's because of the district. The district historically has been hovering right around 65% for the last 30 years. So this jump is statistically significant. And the superintendent, Daryl Adams, said the tablets have played a key role in engaging and retaining students, allowing the higher graduation rate. So there's an interesting shift with this program is now what happens with these big school districts is they'll be assigned an Apple executive to sponsor each school and to lower the friction on adoption and things like that. But the big difference between the two programs in the LA Unified School District, they just kind of threw the technology into school saying, here, have this technology. We don't care what you do with it. Coachella is much better managed. Coachella is a newer project and it's got a lot of implementation in iOS, which has got better educational hooks in it than it did in the iOS 7 days. So what this is a primary example of how management of the project has caused the success as opposed to just the technology thrown into the environment, which causes success, which should come as a surprise to no one.
Yeah, it's multi-layered too. It's not just, Apple obviously learned from the last experience, so they probably went in a little bit better with this one, especially if they're assigning more people to help out. It doesn't appear that Coachella went through the same kind of process that the LA school district did, just in terms of, hey, well, we're going to look at this device, we're going to look at that device. What happens if we can't get this generation of device? It's not the whole stepping stone of shipping out a device preference from, 13 different directions. Mm-hmm. And not only that, like you said, the difference in software will help out a lot too. And how much time is 4 years in technology to a child? Or not even a child, but just an adolescent. Think about how the technology rate was for us compared to how it is for kids now.
Yeah, basically my entire junior high and high school career was on the same Apple II.
Yeah, and I went through 3 Pentiums.
Yeah. So, and look at iPads. There's a new iPad every year.
I think my daughter just in primary school is what, I want to say like 7 iterations of NVIDIA cards. Something like that.
But let this be a lesson to educators. Let this be a lesson to, well, for instance, the LA Unified School District, that technology is not just something you can throw into an educational institution and say, okay, well, we're going to succeed now. It requires proper management. It requires invested teachers. And it requires invested students.
Yeah, it makes you just wonder that there's just more issues with the school district in general. I mean, we know that there was at the management level,
yep,
but there just must be some other communication breakdowns. There's obviously funding issues between different schools. It was just a big, I don't want to say it was set up for failure, but there was too many things working against it.
Yeah, in the LAUS Unified School District, Apple was forced to repay $4.2 million. They took the beating for the educational materials supplier. The school district is under investigation by the SEC and the FBI for corruption, and a federal review of the multi-billion-dollar deal to bring the iPads decided that the project had been mismanaged and tainted by scandal from the beginning, although Apple is not responsible for that. That's all on the old superintendent, John Deasy.
And it was still bad because they didn't even get all of the iPads out.
Yep.
Like, it was so screwed that they ran out of money before they could even deliver that.
Yeah, there was a lot wrong in there, and the school district was very, very quick to point at the technology companies for being the problem, as opposed to the superintendent being the problem. There's a lot wrong in all of this. I spoke briefly about a project that I was working on, and I'm continuing with it, and that's one of the frustrations I'm hearing from some teachers I've spoken with, is that there are closets of technology that they would like to get their hands on that has not been released for use for whatever the reason, whether it be a training issue, whether it be software issue, whether it just be upper staff not that interested in the technology. I'm finding this is more prevalent in some of the poorer school districts in Virginia, that the assets exist, but they just don't have permission to get used. And that's a management issue. That's a project management issue more than anything else. And that's a shame.
Well, good on Coachella, though, because going from 65 to 82, regardless of technology, is great.
Huge jump.
Better than the national average, isn't it?
Unfortunately, I believe it is. I think the national average is like 79.4%, if I remember from my research a little bit earlier today. That is a giant, giant leap, and the school district should be credited for it in every regard, in everything that they've done to get these kids to graduate on time and remain invested in the educational system. Good for them. Good for them.
And probably another good point is it actually went out to citizens too. The actual idea of bonding that money.
Yes, that's a good point. They did address this with the parents. They addressed it with the entire school district. It wasn't just a fait accompli. It wasn't just the superintendent saying, we're going to do this and we're going to sell bonds to do it. It was actually addressed with the community. Anyway, 2 thumbs up for Coachella. MacNN approves. Moving on. So looking at my left wrist right now, I have an Apple Watch Sport on it with a third-party band. If you look a little bit earlier in the week, I launched a new project called 2-Week Trial, where I'm going to do such hideous things as make William Gallagher use an inexpensive PC tablet for a little while to see how he feels about that. And basically...
You're going to make him go buy one of those ones from like Big Lots for like $50?
Well, I was going with Windows 10, not Android. So I was going something a little bit closer. I don't want something he's just going to use as a coaster or a cutting board or something like that. I would like him to actually have some utilization out of it. Any event.
Hey, dual purpose.
Yeah, William, you already know this is coming, so that's should be no surprise. I like Apple products because they're engineered of how they're engineered. The Apple Watch is no exception. This is a very finely engineered piece of equipment. It's just I'm having problems integrating it into my life. It is my primary computing device, as I said in the article, is my MacBook Pro. Admittedly, it's my 2012 Retina MacBook Pro, which is getting a little long in the tooth. But given how Intel's tick-tock, tock thing is going, it's not that much slower than the new models. And the same thing people are using the Apple Watch for with their iOS devices to give them notifications from their iOS device to their watch. I use my phone for that. In fact, if you listen very closely during some podcast times, you can hear my phone jump around on my desk because I haven't remembered to turn it off. What do you think of the Apple Watch, Jordan?
I'm still torn on it. I've never been a huge fan of adopting something on the first go unless it's something I've been able to be passionate about. And the Apple Watch has never struck a chord with me that way. Mm-hmm. It's neat. I sound like an old person, but
okay.
I can see the applications, the idea of how useful it can be in everyday life. And the most appealing aspect for me is it can tie into health features and still doesn't need to be something I need to put on special to achieve that. So I think it has more functionality compared to wearing like a fitness band or something like that. I just don't get the overall appeal though. Yet I don't wear a watch. I have a cell phone. that I can just pull out of my pocket and look.
Okay.
Obviously, it's not appealing to me. So it'd be interesting to see if someone like you that's kind of a late adopter into things, or at least ambitious about it and wants to dig into it a little bit more, can see how quickly you like this, or if you don't.
I'm sneak preview for next week's 2-week recap. I think when it comes off, it's staying off. it doesn't do enough for me. It is an additional complication in my life that gives me no additional gain. And it's not the battery life that's the problem, because I'm not slamming the battery on this. When I put it back on the charger at the end of the night, it's still 60% charged, and I've worn it all day, and I've checked all my notifications on it, and I've checked my calendar on it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's just, and I delve more into the reasons for some of these statements in the article. And Jordan knows me probably even better than Charles or anyone else in the MacNN team, because we've known each other for a very long time at this point. But he's right. I don't get this year's technology. I get last year's technology when this year's technology comes out. Apple technology has typically required an aha moment for me. I've typically had to look at it and go, what is this going to do for me? Oh, I know. And then I would implement it and say, okay, that's great. Like, for instance, the iPod shipped. I said, why the hell do you need that? And my wife said, yes, we need that. And I said, oh, fine, we'll get an iPod. And then I used it on a 5-hour road trip and said, oh yeah, well, we're never doing satellite radio ever again. So, and I was wondering if more time being forced to use the watch was going to give me that aha moment. It just hasn't so far. Now, maybe something's going to happen in the next 5 days. I don't know, but I'm not holding my breath.
Can you play Doom on it yet?
Well, considering somebody put Windows 95 on it, probably.
But it's an official device where you can run Doom on it, right?
Yeah, if you're uninformed, Jordan's been wrestling getting Doom running on his gaming PC tonight, so he's a little steamed about that at the moment.
No, if something can turn you on something like that, I know that there's a chance that I can find some kind of use for it.
I'm not even sure how to take that statement.
Because if I'm skeptical, I think I tend to have more...
I'm waiting for this.
I don't want to say necessarily optimism. Okay. But I don't look at reality as harshly as you do at times.
Okay, I'll take that.
But it's that idea. I think it's always a good idea to give somebody something that is totally critical of a device. I mean, we look at this kind of stuff in a bubble sometimes because we have to be critical of things, or for reviewing something, we naturally have to compare it to what we like and what we don't like. And it's very one-sided depending how you want to look at it. So, I can review a game on another game of a series that I really like. Is that necessarily fair? Well, I'm going to be more critical of it because I like the rest of them. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I'm inherently biased because I like the other ones.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. And part of people have been saying, well, there's no objectivity in reviews. Well, yeah, it's a review. There's never going to be objectivity. That's not how reviews work. The only thing we can tell you that's non-objective, the only thing we can tell you that is completely factual are the specs of the device. Beyond that, how we use it, what we use it for, what it feels like, what it sounds like, what it smells like, this is all opinion.
Yeah, to me, it's much harder to do that with an actual physical device than it is for software.
Okay.
So someone that can give a skeptical look on it that says, look, I really see nothing wrong with it, or I never see how this is going to add to my daily life. And if you give them a fixed time period and go, okay, well, what do you think afterwards? I think even if you walk away with some positive that you didn't have before, somebody should be able to take that and go, maybe this is that one piece that I needed to push me with edge on it.
Yeah, and again, I see a lot of use cases for this. Like my sister-in-law's Apple Watch, she actually responds to her text messages now. That's kind of a huge deal as far as I'm concerned, given the complex nature of my family. The health sensors, I love the concept of the health sensors, but they're kind of half-baked right now. They're not what they could be, and I think what they will be in future iterations of the software. Not necessarily the hardware, but in future iterations of the software, I think we're going to see a lot expand on this existing Apple Watch. Like I said, it's just not fitting in to my lifestyle. But on the plus side, like I said, I'm seeing use cases.
Yeah, and I think that's the way you kind of have to look at it. I think walking into it as a skeptical person is the right way to do it. Now that we're actually digging into our difference in review styles. But
yeah, before I get accused of being a total misanthrope, let's move on. Before we talk to William for the app of the week, Disney's financials came out for the quarter, and really they're not that great. They didn't meet their own target.
Holding on too much to that idea that everything else is going to bring in the money for them, I guess.
Well, as part of the fallout on this is, once again, they're ramping down software development, and they're completely stopping development on Disney Infinity after the next two playsets are done.
Which is kind of sad.
They were second to the game on Toys to Life. Skylanders was first. Disney Infinity was next, and Lego was third, but Lego's in no danger because, well, Lego, right?
But would you argue those are necessarily the ones that pushed him out?
I don't know. That's a good question. Disney Infinity always seemed like an afterthought to me. I've played the game a couple times and the gameplay just isn't there. My kids love the figures. Oh my God. And the unified art style is fantastic. All of the Disney Infinity people appear to have been made by the same artist. They all have the same style, regardless if it's a Cars figure, regardless if it's Toy Story or Incredibles or whatever, all got the same style. And that's amazing. I'm wondering what's going to happen. Well, right now I pity the GameStop employees, because I imagine they're getting crushed with exchange figures. But in 6 months, when these things are off the Toys R Us shelves, other than 10,000 Woodies or something like that, I'm interested to see what the secondary market is going to do to these figures.
It's just going to go the way of the collector. It's not going to be even the game anymore. These aren't ones that I necessarily thought had a large shelf life in terms of game longevity. Just this whole toy thing anyway. Mm-hmm. It's more the collector's aspect. And that's why I kind of lean on, I don't think it was necessarily Skylanders or Lego's Dimension that did them in. I think it was Nintendo.
The Amiibos? Maybe, yeah.
Yes. And which is hilarious because Amiibos have like no functionality.
Very, very little, yeah.
Not to say they don't have a use, they just don't have a lot of uses. It's like, here's my chip that stores my data for this one character that I can only use on the Wii U version correctly, but hey, it looks pretty.
See, I would have thought that the one that would have gotten squeezed out was the Skylanders one, because there was no surrounding intellectual property.
I thought Activision would have abandoned it. That just seems to be one of the things Activision does after a time.
That is a true statement. So it's sad. My kids love the figures. They're a little too young to really acknowledge that Disney is going to not make them anymore. And they're solid enough that I'm not too worried about it. They'll be played with for a while. But there you go. It's an idea struck down before its time, I think. And I think the bigger issue that Disney has to face is this is not what's causing their money hemorrhaging. But I guess it's one of the causes. So we'll see what they do with time. But Star Wars is going to be a money pumper for them. And I'm sure Captain America did very well for them.
Maybe they'll release Disney Infinity out of the vault in 10 years in a collector's edition.
Oh, I didn't even think about that. Oh, no, the Disney Vault. Oh.
You can only buy Aladdin once every 15 years. What? Why?
And hurry, because once it's gone, it's gone. Yeah. This 15 years, it's on Blu-ray. Yep.
I can't wait till the Star Wars editions.
Oh my God, I forgot about the vault. Jeez, I forgot about the Disney Vault. That's terrible.
This one we colored Yoda brown. Wait, why?
The special edition of Star Wars Episode 4.
Yeah, the Vault version, this one has one side of the 3D lens. It's a special lens we only created for this. So in 15 years, you have to buy the other one.
Well, completely, related, actually. If you don't think that there's going to be a special edition of The Force Awakens when the next Star Wars movie comes out, not Rogue One, when Episode 8 comes out, you're so sadly mistaken. I guarantee you the movie's going to be 20 minutes longer.
Not to mention when they release the box set of the next 3.
Yeah.
Or the 9-pack.
Oh, the 9-pack.
What would it actually be up to then? 15? Or no, 16?
Oh, geez, let's see. That's 6 years from now. There's a Han Solo movie coming. There's Rogue One coming. There's a discussion that there's going to be an Obi-Wan movie.
Well, isn't Boba Fett in that mix too?
Yeah, there's discussion about, oh my God. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 more Star Wars movies in 6 years.
Well, they're doing one a year.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Wow. That's a thing, huh?
There's your tangent for the night, ladies and gentlemen.
To say nothing of Rebels and everything else that's associated with it. So, okay. That's enough of that. So, an analysis of App Store revenue and download estimates just this year are showing that the App Store is maybe not quite so workers' paradise as Apple wants you to believe. According to the data, 623 publishers, who are just 1% of all the publishers in the App Store, pulled down $1.34 billion of the estimated $1.43 billion in net revenue generated for the period. The remaining $85.8 million was split among 61,000 publishers.
That's a lot of people.
And this includes in-app purchases, by the way. So the free-to-play games like Clash of Clans and Angry Birds and whatnot, yeah, that includes downloadable expendables.
That's a string.
Is this a problem? I mean, I don't necessarily think this is a problem, and I'm not terribly surprised by this.
Depends which way you look at it. In terms of concentration for a market, yeah, it's terrible. That's a very bad lean on that one. Only 623 people made that much money and dominated that much of the market.
Well, 623 people, right? That's Rovio. Rovio's in there. That's not a person. That's an entire company.
Right. Yeah, and you really have to know how far that breaks down. And I'm not trying to pin responsibility on Apple or anything like that. There's so many other variables to play at that. But it also shows the importance of that market market of that iTunes assault as a whole. It'd be interesting to see how that compares to like Google Play figures. And I know that's a little more of a Wild West in terms of developers, but man, that's a staggering difference.
It is. The top 10 publishers in the App Store right now are Google, Facebook, Ketchup, Fortify Games, Electronic Arts, King, Snapchat, and Amazon.
Well, yeah, and there you go. You can explain a couple of those anyway.
Yep. On one hand, this says that companies that make good software will be rewarded. On the other hand, it says that maybe discovery on the App Store isn't exactly what it needs to be. But on the other hand, I'm not sure exactly why that's Apple's fault and not the app developer's fault. No one said that the App Store is going to be the place to get discovered.
No, and you shouldn't be depending on a marketplace for your discovery. If you want to be discovered, do the legwork.
Yeah,
you
PR is still your own responsibility, and obviously getting on an Apple featured chart makes a huge, huge difference in your sales.
Well, more eyes is never going to hurt.
Yeah, more eyes is never going to hurt. I've got a lot of things tumbling around in my head right now, like the commoditization of mobile software, where we think that 99 cents is too much to pay. But on the other hand, $19 for 4,000 Smurf berries is fine. And I'm also, at the same time, I'm thinking about the Steam model where $10 for a game, if a game you wanted to sell for $40, you sell it for $10, you got to make 8 times the sale.
Well, that's a whole nother story because they are supremely guarded about those figures. And
yes,
to the degree if you're a developer and you sign up with them, you cannot talk. That's how bad it is. Like, actually go look at their agreements. You can't say a damn thing. There's
a lot going on with the App Store. As far as OS X goes, they require your app to be sandboxed. There's a lot of things you cannot do. Like, for instance, I'm using Audio Hijack Pro, the previous version, to record this podcast because I haven't quite gotten around to figuring out the new version of Audio Hijack. You can't do the level of system integration on Audio Hijack Pro in the App Store. There are other apps you can use, but nothing like Audio Hijack Pro because it can't be sandboxed. On the iOS store, obviously there's requirements there, and we ran into trouble with our books because Apple said, well, you're using a screenshot from an Apple product in your cover, and people might confuse it as an Apple book, but there's no chance of that, considering it said MacNN on it in frickin' 3-inch tall letters. So there are issues associated with the App Store and the media stores that you don't necessarily run into if you self-sell something, but anymore, are you even going to make any money self-selling something if you're not on the App Store? So there are benefits and a lot of disadvantages to being on the App Store. But the question is the benefits outweigh the disadvantages?
That's a hard one to answer. I can't say for myself any more than I can say for another person these days. It all depends on what you're creating, how much time you think it's worth, and the effort you expend to get everything done in general.
Related to that, earlier this week it came out that Apple had approached their top podcasters to find out what they can do. Apple has a very hands-off approach to podcasts. They don't host them. All they're doing is they're acting as an RSS aggregator. So, like when you download the MacNN podcast, you're just getting the RSS through the Apple servers. You're not getting the podcast through the Apple servers. You're getting the podcast from SoundCloud right now, which we may shift that not too long. So Apple really has very little to do with this. They take no revenue because most podcasts don't generate any revenue. But on the other hand, they're not doing any hosting or anything like that either. And my opinion on that is people are saying, well, Apple can do this and Apple can do that. But what I say is be careful what you wish for because you might actually get it. I'm not convinced that we want Apple to have anything to do with podcasting other than just being an RSS aggregator.
Well, just the same way you would want Apple determining the worth of someone's app other than, I guess, their standard gatekeeping acts.
Which has been said that that's a little heavy-handed. Well, it's been said in the same breath that not only is it heavy-handed, but it's also slow to act.
Yeah.
There's a lot of clone apps that just take people's stuff just wholesale, and it takes them forever to respond to copyright claims. We did a story about that last year, and we'll have to put it in the podcast notes about one developer who was fighting about a Chinese knockoff of his app, and it took Apple a very long time to do anything about it. And even so, then the Chinese app developer filed a complaint, which even confused things even more.
Do you really want them to step in anymore? Like I said, the disparity between those two numbers is pretty big, especially when you boil it down to the revenue factor.
Yeah.
And even still, the revenue is probably split amongst the top 10% of those anyway.
Yeah, I'm willing to bet that 85.8 million it says it's split among the other 61,000 publishers. I'm willing to bet that the vast majority of that is split among probably another 1,000, with a couple of people here and there selling 10 apps a week.
It'd also be interesting how much that breaks down to in-game, or I guess in-app purchases rather than actual app purchases in general. Because I wonder if that would shift the scale. That's the only reason I bring that up.
I think it would make it worse. I think that more of the revenue would shift to an even smaller amount of people than it would anything else. I'm a huge, huge fan of board game conversions in iOS. A giant fan of them. Ticket to Ride and just games like that. Kalos, and I've got a bunch of Games Workshop games in my head that I'm all conflagrating on my tongue. So it's Space Hulk. That's what I've been trying to get out. Space Hulk. And they're premium apps. They're $10 apps or they're $7 apps. And people are saying, oh, this is way too much. Have you looked at board game prices and you're telling me a $7 app is too much? Space Hulk is $100 freaking dollars.
Actually, it depends which version too.
It could be well more. It could be very much more than that. But $7 for the app on the iPad, and you're complaining. The App Store needs help, and I'm just not sure what help it needs. I'm not sure if it needs people to acknowledge that mobile apps don't have to be free, and I'm not sure if Discovery is going to help that. I'm not sure what is going to help this.
The store isn't doing any favors by basing just popularity on sheer number of, or eyes on sheer number of downloads.
Well, they do have a top grossing section as well.
Right, but you know what I mean. It's like new, most downloaded.
Yeah.
It's not giving any specified airtime to the little guy. Not saying they should, but when you have these apps that are getting millions of downloads that are doing $3 a pop in-game purchases, where do you think this is occurring?
Yeah.
It's not doing any favors to other people. So the moral of the story is tell people about your shit.
Yeah, do your own marketing. I guess that's the key, isn't it?
Do your own stuff.
And that's why people like MacNN exist, frankly. That's why Touch Arcade exists. That's why a bunch of us exist, is we will be happy. You send along a code, we'll be happy to review your app. But beware. Again, it's one of those things that if you want it, be careful, because if your app is garbage, we'll tell you. In any event, on that cheery note, let's talk to William about his app of the week. William, take it away.
It's the app of the week for certain and with ease, but as well as occupying me for the last 7 to 10 days while I should have been doing all sorts of other things, this one, it's going to be engrossing me for at least the rest of the year. It's FileMaker Pro 15, the new version of the database program. Now, if you go onto the App Store and you search with the word database, you'll get address books, you'll get, well, all sorts of contact apps, things to do with logging what's in your house for insurance purposes. You'll get note-taking apps. I had a look, and you get a calorie counter as well. Not interested in that. FileMaker 15 does not do any of this, but it helps you do all of it. You can make up your own database to do anything, and it's exactly what you need for your company or yourself. Right now, for example, I'm just running one database at the moment that I created in FileMaker Pro, a job book, lists commissions, and just whether they're done yet. It probably could not be a simpler database, but when it comes times to issue an invoice, I press one button and it shows me a list of everything that I've been assigned to do, but that I've also completed and yet haven't invoiced for yet. I could go further. I could add a second button. I could tell it to generate the invoice for me automatically. I could do that, and I probably will do that when I get around to it. That's the thing with FileMaker. Build a custom database to do anything you need and then adjust it anytime you like. The new version, FileMaker Pro 15, it does add some interesting new features, particularly to do with iBeacons. That made me sit up, but it isn't a giant change, and there hasn't been a giant change in FileMaker in some time. It's still the case that the core, the existing features are the reason to buy this. But take a look on MacNN.com, where I've done 2 different reviews. One for if you're completely new to FileMaker Pro, and one for if you're an old hand looking to see whether or not it's worth upgrading. Though, by the way, short version, yes, it is. FileMaker Pro costs from either $329 outright or about $108 per year.
That about wraps it up for this episode of the MacNN podcast. Charles should return next week, but maybe he'll be off saving the world for democracy or something like that. But on behalf of MacNN and Charles and Jordan and I and everyone else in the MacNN staff, thank you for listening. We appreciate each and every one of you. If you have any comments on anything we've said tonight, please leave a comment in the show notes section or email me at tips@macnn.com. Have a good night, everybody.
Later, folks.
Goodbye.